Terrific. Good. I guess it's afternoon now, everyone. It's so nice to have you all here. Welcome to our our virtual Reclaiming Vacant Property event. As Ayana indicated, my name is Dina Fein. I'm very, very pleased to be welcoming you here and hosting this event today. I want to begin by thanking MassINC for really being the host, and special thanks to Ayana, whom you've met briefly. Ayana Polk, she's the Director of Communications for MassINC, and she's been supporting this event since it was just a sort of twinkle in her eye, and she'll be with us throughout the session. So thanks again. This is a different kind of format for those of us who are presenting. We're in a webinar mode, so we can't see all your faces, although I've had a chance to see your names as you're joining us. And so I know that many of us know each other, and I'm delighted that you could be with us today. Why don't I begin with introductions? So again, my name's Dina Fein. I'm a retired housing court judge, and I'm currently a senior fellow, a Greg Torres senior fellow at MassINC. I'm working on repurposing vacant distressed properties into affordable first-time homeownership opportunities. Joining me as panelists today will be Amber Villa, who's the chief of the Neighborhood Renewal Division at the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. And incidentally, I'm introducing people in order of when we expect that they'll be speaking. Josh Amaral, Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of New Bedford. Gerry McCafferty, Director of Housing for the City of Springfield. John Gilbert, Vice President of Real Estate Development at Wayfinders, and Beverly Estes-Smargiassi, who is the Program Manager for the Neighborhood Stabilization Program at MassHousing. And again, special thanks to Ayana Polk, MassINC's Director of Communications. So I thought I'd begin by trying to give folks a sense of what we're going to try to do today and what the agenda will look like, so that you're somewhat prepared for that. As I think you all know, this is a follow-up event to an in-person conference that MassINC and others hosted on April 8th. All of us who will be speaking today were also participants in that conference. Many of you attended the conference in person, and we know from comments that you made at the conference and questions that you submitted after the conference that you were interested in further discussion. Many of you were not able to be at the conference in person and reached out to us to express interest in engaging with the topic in some way. So what we've tried to do today, we'll see whether we hit the mark or not, but what we've tried to do is design a program for today's events that reviews some of the foundational material that was presented at the conference in April, while also drilling down into the practical considerations regarding how to do more of this work in your communities. And just to sort of zoom out for a second here, obviously what we're here to talk about is how to go about reclaiming vacant properties and putting them to good use, both to help stabilize neighborhoods and to address what we all know is an urgent crisis in Massachusetts in terms of housing availability and affordability. So that's what we're here to talk about today. In particular, we'd like to talk about two tools that have been around for a long time in terms of reclaiming vacant properties. They are receivership. The use of receivership is one tool, and tax title as a second tool. As I indicated, they've been around for a long time, but they've also both undergone recent changes, and we want to fill you in on those changes and help you understand how you might put them to use in your respective roles, in your respective communities. So I will be speaking about receivership in just a moment. Amber will then talk about tax title properties. Josh and Gerry will talk about how municipalities use these tools with a focus on both the strategic planning around the use of those tools and practical application of them. John will discuss how nonprofits can participate in the work. And then Bev, whom we're holding last but not least till last, will discuss funding sources. Bev and John and Josh both will discuss funding sources that might be available to help you do this work. We will end the session with a Q&A and a couple of comments about that. There is a Q&A box, which is not to be confused with the chat box. And so we are asking you please to use that box for your questions. We've held 15 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. If those of us who are speaking notice a question while during the course of our remarks that we think we can answer in real time, we'll be happy to. If not, we'll try our best to turn to it at the end of the session. And if all else fails, you can be assured that we will be following up on your questions, responding to them after the webinar, and trying very much to stay engaged with all of you. So that's what the event will look like. Ayanna, have I missed anything in terms of preliminaries?
No, I think you did a great job, Dina.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, so why don't I begin by talking about receivership? And I guess, Ayanna, that means that maybe those slides or the first of those slides can come up now. There we are. So receivership. Receivership is a code enforcement remedy. It's a statutory remedy, which means it was created by statute in Massachusetts, and it's a remedy of last resort. For the most part, neither municipalities nor courts jump immediately to receivership. But when the owner of a property has either abandoned the property or is in other ways unable or unwilling to bring the property up to code, a statute, which is specifically Mass General Laws, Chapter 111, Section 127I, allows a court of competent jurisdiction, and in Massachusetts, that's typically a housing court, to place the property into receivership. To put the property under the control of a court-appointed receiver. The receiver traditionally makes the repairs that are necessary to bring the property up to code. And in order to support the receiver's investment in making those repairs, by statute, the receiver has a super priority lien on the property. In other words, the statute gives the receiver a lien on the property that trumps all other encumbrances on the property, all other liens on the property, except for municipal liens, typically municipal taxes. So that's sort of the background. Receivership is a creature of statute. Typically, the court appoints a receiver who does the repairs and secures his or her or its investment with a super priority lien on the property. Okay, Ayanna, I think we can turn to the next slide. Recently, the receivership was amended, and the amendment went through in the Affordable Homes Act, which was passed, as we'll recall, in the summer of 23. My years are a little fuzzy. It was either 23 or 24. I apologize. I should know, because I was eagerly watching to see if this provision would be included, and sure enough, it was. What the amendment does is it amends the receivership statute. And I see that Elise Raposa has asked a question about whether receivership is available in the context of commercial buildings. And the short answer is sometimes, but in my experience, it's rarely used in a receivership. I'm sorry, in a commercial context. The statute is focused on residential properties. Receivership is also an equitable remedy, which courts with appropriate jurisdiction can invoke apart from the terms of the statute. And I know I just got a little bit in the legal weeds with you all, So Elise, we can talk more about that either at the close of the session or offline. In any event, the receivership statute was amended in the Affordable Homes Act, and the amendment now expressly authorizes a court to allow a court-appointed receiver to sell a vacant residential property in its as-is condition, meaning without making repairs. Sell it to a nonprofit conditioned upon the court finding that the nonprofit will rehabilitate the property and sell it affordably to a first-time homebuyer whose income is not more than 120% of the area median income. So again, it authorizes the court to permit the sale of a receivership property as is to a nonprofit, conditioned upon the nonprofit turning around, rehabbing it, and selling it affordably to an income-eligible first-time home buyer. And there's a question about whether that's written somewhere, and the answer is yes. It's in Section 29 of the Affordable Homes Act. It's the language that's up on the screen now. And the way legislation works is it exists in a bill, in this case, the Affordable Homes Act, and it will work its way into the receivership statute, which is the citation I gave you earlier in my remarks, Chapter 111, Section 127I. But this language that's up on the screen is in fact in the Affordable Homes Act. Okay, next slide, please. So traditionally, receivers were, at least in the event of the court where I worked in Western Massachusetts, small contractors, rental property managers, or lawyers. And again, traditionally, the receivers would bring the property up to code, often using their own funds protected by this priority lien, and then disposing of the property when the work was done, either by auction or private sale, in order to recover the receiver's investment and discharge the receiver's lien. There's a question in the chat about whether the nonprofit in the new model still pays the municipal taxes owed. And the answer is somebody does. And I can get to that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So with the benefit of the amendment in the statute, and frankly, as a pilot, even before the statute was amended, a group of us, and you'll hear from many of them today, came together and piloted this new model for using receivership in Western Massachusetts. And the pilot has been going on probably for a couple of years now. And basically the way it works, and you'll hear more about each of these elements from others on the panel, is that the municipality has identified areas of the city in which they would like to see receivership used, if it's going to be, in order to stabilize the neighborhood in question and generate affordable housing there. And when a 1 or 2 unit, in the case of Springfield, vacant property comes through the code enforcement process and is in line for receivership, the municipality makes the decision about whether they want to use this new model. If so, when the municipality, through its law department, petitions for appointment of receiver, they specify that they want to invoke this section of the statute, that they want a form of receivership where the goal is going to be to transfer that property, that now vacant distressed property as is, into the hands of a nonprofit in order for the nonprofit to do the rehab and then turn around and sell it affordably. If the court agrees with that request, a special attorney receiver is appointed. That special attorney receiver, we call them SARs, boards and secures the property, gets insurance, and then goes about the process of identifying the nonprofit. Often in this case, actually entirely in this case to date, wayfinders, for reasons that you'll understand as we work through the program, investigates whether they're interested in the property. If so, makes an offer. because the special attorney receiver will have gotten a fair market value appraisal of the property in its distressed condition. The nonprofit makes an offer, the receiver requests leave of court to sell that property as is to that nonprofit, consistent with that offer. And if all of that is allowed by the court, the property is transferred to the nonprofit, and then the nonprofit does what it says what it committed to doing, namely rehabilitates it and sells it affordably to an income eligible first-time home buyer. So that's basically the new model. It's how it has worked in Western Massachusetts, and you'll hear more both from the AG's office and from the city of Springfield and from Wayfinders about the particulars of all of that. In answer to circling back to the question about whether the municipal taxes are paid, the answer is yes. They're either paid off out of the proceeds, they're paid by the receiver and become a part of the lien, but these properties cannot transfer without dealing with the municipal taxes in some way. And there's a question about whether this is basically an RFP. I think I'm going to hold that question until the person who's asked it has heard more about the approach that the municipality is taking, and see if that is still a question towards the end of this session. So that's receivership. It's the new model for receivership. It's the way we've used it in Western Mass. Let me just make a few more comments, and then I'm going to pass the session down the line next to Amber Villa from the AG's office. As I've indicated, the use of receivership in this way to deal with vacant distressed properties and get them into the hands of a nonprofit to rehab and sell affordably by design to an income eligible first-time home buyer has been piloted in Western Massachusetts. So the Western Division of the Housing Court, for those of you who are housing court adjacent in some way, has experience with this model. We're all in the process of working out the kinks of what it actually looks like in the court process. You'll hear from others about that. But what I also wanted you to know is that I have been invited to present this new model and the particulars of how it can be used in the housing court to all of the other housing courts at their annual conference in September. And so for those of you who practice in some way as municipal lawyers, as code enforcement people, as private practitioners, as developers in jurisdictions other than Western Massachusetts, please know that the housing courts across the state are interested in understanding how this model works. They are willing to be educated about the use of the statute. They are interested in being trained up into this approach. And so feel free to invoke the statute in jurisdictions outside of Western Massachusetts. That's what it's there for. And finally, I'm available to assist anybody around the state in using receivership in the way that I've described here. So I think that's it for my comments. Okay, there's a question. Let me just follow up on a couple of questions and then turn it over to Amber. There's a question about whether, from Felicity, hello Felicity, about whether an SAR is required for a non-traditional Affordable Homes Act receivership. I'm not exactly sure that I understand the question, but let me just say that I think what the statute authorizes in black and white is well within the equitable jurisdiction of a court to do without the statute. But I also thought it was a very good idea to have it in black and white in the statute. And so while I don't think it's necessary to invoke the statute in order to pursue this model of receivership, I don't see why a moving party would want to do anything other than follow the terms of the statute, which are somewhat more detailed than we had even pursuant to equitable authority prior to enactment of the statute. Again, a little legally of me, but I hope that answers your question. And I'm going to punt on the question that Virginia is asking about whether a municipality can waive their lien for taxes. I'll let the municipal people answer that. My memory is that they have very, very limited ability to tweak a lien for municipal taxes, but I'll leave it to others who are more expert in that area than I. And it looks like Gerry's weighing in with an answer to that question. So thank you for my time. I hope I haven't exceeded it. I'm going to bounce to Amber now, and I will try to help folks move through the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to jump real quick on Felicity's question as well, because I think we're starting to see this question come through in a couple of different aspects about whether the receiver actually has to be an attorney, which is what has been used in Western Massachusetts, is using the SAR as being a special attorney receiver. The new language in the statute doesn't require an attorney, but we have not yet tried it without having a special attorney receiver. So I think that is a little bit to be determined. It may be a little bit determined by the comfort of the court as they are implementing the new statute, but there will be follow-up to that soon. And I see that Judge Fein is also going to add a little bit to that as well. Okay, so I'm here to talk a little bit about the tax title changes that came about in July of 2024 as part of the state budget. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly because I think there's one, it's really legal and kind of technical. Two, some of you already heard me talk about this. And three, I think everybody's really interested in financing and figuring out some of the nuts and bolts about how to do the bigger of this work outside of the very technical legal piece. So I'm going to move quickly. If that means there are questions, I will try to take those as I can. And we'll move as quickly as we can. All right. So, Ayana, can we move back a couple of slides? I think there, that's a good one to start. There we go. So there's, all right. So we're going to do a quick, just sort of recover some of what we covered in Springfield the other day, just to give everybody sort of a basis for conversation. Okay, next slide, Ayana. Okay. Things might be a little jumbled, so I'm going to go, I'll jump around just a little bit. So first of all, I do have to give a quick little disclaimer that this information is really for informational purposes. I can't give legal advice. I know that sounds funny from the Attorney General's office, but we are sort of statutorily prohibited from giving individuals legal advice, but encourage you to talk with your city solicitors and town council, and also happy to talk with them a little bit more about particular issues that may come up. So one question is, why was there a change to the Massachusetts tax foreclosure process? And part of that is because, well, the key reason for that is that prior to the 2024 changes, Massachusetts statute allowed for the foreclosing entity on a tax title to keep all of the equity from the tax sale. This was counter to the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Tyler versus Hennepin County, which struck down a similar law in Minnesota. So last year, the legislature amended the tax foreclosure statute in July to bring it into compliance with the Tyler decision. So what are the key changes to the tax foreclosure process? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, prior to the changes, the foreclosing entity could keep all of the equity from a sale. The Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional, that the taxing entity is only entitled to the amount of they're actually owed. And so there's this concept of excess equity. So what is excess? What is owed to the taxing entity, and what is excess and belongs to the owner or lien holders at the property? So the new statute, the amendments to the statute actually define what excess equity is. And then the crux of the statute is that it provides for That within 14 days of final judgment, the judgment holder has to elect whether to retain the possession of the property or to sell the property. So really that's the municipality has to decide, am I going to keep this property for some sort of public purpose or am I going to sell it? And then at the end of that process, the person who owned the property or lien holders has 18 months to submit a claim to the judgment holder for that equity. If they don't claim it within 18 months, it's supposed to be sent over to the Unclaimed Property Division of the Commonwealth, where it will be held until it is claimed by whoever actually can demonstrate that they have a legal right to the funds. All right. Next slide, Ayanna. Oh, and then one after this. These look like they got flipped. There we go. Oh, okay. So, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. No worries. I'm looking for the slide that says option to retain property. Maybe one more. There we go. Thank you. So as I mentioned, there are two options for a municipality when they are foreclosing on a property or anyone who owns the tax title. And that is that they can retain the property or they can sell it. Now, if they choose to retain the property, they have to use reasonable efforts to have the property appraised within 120 days. That appraisal is to be either for the highest and best use as of the date of the final judgment, and the appraisal needs to be conducted by an independent appraiser licensed by the Commonwealth. This will come up with the amount, the technical sales price or the price that the property is worth. And from that, the municipality will be charged with determining what the excess equity is. So how much of that assessed value of the property exceeds the amount owed in taxes and allowable fees. That excess equity will need to be put into an interest-bearing account and held for the person who's entitled to the excess equity, whether they be an owner or a lien holder. All right, can we go to the slide that says option to sell the property? Thank you. If the municipality or tax title holder determines that they're going to sell the property, then under the current statute, the way it's written, they have to list it for sale with a real estate broker or agent within 180 days, although the parties can agree to more time. That agent or broker cannot hold elected office or appointed office or be employed by the municipality. And if the property fails to sell within 12 months, they have to hold an auction. If the property does not sell, they can elect to schedule another sale and it's not considered retained, where the municipality themselves would have to come up with the excess equity. So those are the two options. At the end of the day, what that does is determine the value of the property, and anything that's in excess of the amount of taxes owed plus some allowable fees and interest, then that's going to be given to or made available to the owner of the property. All right, Ayanna, can we go to the takeaways related to tax foreclosure? Thank you. So some of the questions that we've seen come up about this are, why did the tax foreclosure process change, and why is it limiting what municipalities can do now with the property? And I think there are some questions out there, but I think it's really important to note that the title following a tax foreclosure process is absolute. It was absolute under the old statute, and it remains absolute. General Laws, Chapter 60, Section 64, says that the title conveyed by a tax collector's deed or by a taking of land for taxes shall be absolute after foreclosure of the right of redemption by judgment of the land court. And then Chapter 60, Section 77 also says that after foreclosure by a town of the rights of redemption under a tax title or taking, the land shall thereafter be held and disposed of like any land belonging to it and held for municipal purposes. So really, the changes here are pre-foreclosure, and once that foreclosure process is completed, whoever owns the property and can do with it as they see fit, as their title is absolute under the statute. So that's one thing that I hope answers some questions. And then another point here is related to the status of taxes and receivership, is that in the receivership context, we really encourage municipalities not to sit back too long on back taxes, because as they mount and as interest mounts, it makes it more difficult to do a receivership, because if the taxes become a significant cost in rehabbing the property, it may just push the financing of that receivership into an infeasible status. So encourage municipalities to consider that when they're trying to figure out the timing of conducting a tax taking and tax foreclosure. And I think we all know that sometimes the tax foreclosure process can take a really long time. And so getting started on that, if that's the option that you're going to pursue, then we would recommend on getting that started. If you're going straight to receivership, if your property is in really bad shape, vacant and in bad shape, you can go straight to receivership, but the lower the taxes are, the more flexibility we have in helping you get that property fixed. So those are the quick points on tax title. I'm just going to scroll to see if there are any questions that I can answer quickly.
Amber,
So I see,
I've
yeah,
jumped on a couple of things and have some notes about some of the questions that bear on the relationship between receivership, sales price, taxes, etc. I've provided some answers in writing, but also indicated that I'd like to address some of that during the Q&A.
that sounds great. And I see one question here, which has to do with Chapter 60, Section 77B regarding leasebacks of tax title. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that. I will see if I can answer that before the end of the day. If not, I'm happy to take a call on that at some time following the conclusion of today's event.
Great. Thanks, Amber. So Amber and I just did a lot of legal stuff. And I could tell from the look on Amber's face that we both hope that it was at least helped to set the context for the rest of the discussion. I think now we can get into the more practical considerations about how these tools have been and are being deployed by municipalities. And so let's turn it over to Josh and Gerry to talk about that with you all. I think that's you, Josh, right?
Yeah, waiting for the slides. Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, Dina, and hello, everybody. Josh Amaral, Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of New Bedford. As Dina said, trying to ground some of the earlier discussion in at least New Bedford's experience in the last couple of years, sort of carving out a strategy around vacant properties. And so I'll take you through a little information about how we landed there. And I think this is very replicable in other places. Go to the next slide, Anna. So in spring of 2023, we released Building New Bedford, which is sort of our kind of comprehensive strategy around housing. It includes 22 different strategies around boosting our housing supply, providing assistance to those who need it, and addressing the impacts of this housing shortage that has caused affordability of housing to be threatened. And one of those 22 strategies was that the city would launch a new initiative to reactivate vacant properties. Now's a good time to mention that it's very important in this to have the support of your elected officials. So our mayor, John Mitchell, has had a very clear vision about code enforcement and about how we should be maximizing the potential of these vacant properties and bringing them back online as a means of our housing strategy, and also as a means of making neighborhoods more improving quality of life and making them more livable and enjoyable for people. And that's been echoed by other elected officials throughout the area. Our Office of Housing Community Development team has been really committed to this as well. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Ashley Eaton, who's our neighborhood planner and long involved in our receivership program, as well as Jordan Latham, our vacant property development manager. You can go to the next slide. Here's the page in our Building New Bedford book specific to this effort with some pictures of some sample properties. In this bit here, we talk about creating a position that is solely devoted to bringing back vacant property, really with an eye toward residential reuse, but increasingly looking at commercial properties as well. There's an interest across the state in commercial property conversion to residential, but also a place in any city or town for commercial vacant commercial property to be brought back online for commercial purposes as well. And so that's part of our work. Her job is to work with mortgage holders, probate court, other stakeholders, working within our office and as well as with the Attorney General's office to bring forward receivership cases and address things in other ways. We also, in the last sentence here, established the creation of a new interdepartmental team. And you can go to the next slide on that. So we call it the Vacant Property Working Group, and here's a picture of them in action. I think they were talking about creating a waiver from our vacant building registry for properties that are in active rehab. So the goal of this is not to be punitive toward vacant property owners. It's really to encourage or facilitate the reuse of those properties. And so while there is a fee to register, and we hope that that's sort of a disincentive from keeping property vacant long term, the goal is really to get it back going. So we don't want to penalize that. This is a full list of departments that we've engaged in the effort, and so the room gets pretty full, thankfully. It's not just our department, but inspectional services, police department, fire department, the mayor's office, the treasurer's office, our environmental folks. As it happens, a lot of vacant property remains vacant because there's some sort of environmental contamination issue, and so we've increasingly taken the approach that if environmental issues are going to hold back development forever, we should just get ahead of it and figure out how to move those properties along. Inevitably, we interact with public infrastructure, the water department. We've used municipal water usage in these properties as a potential indicator of vacancy and a way for us to find some properties. Chances are, if you're not using water in a residential structure, it's been vacant for some time. We have a neighborhood task force that's really clued in on 40U violations and in code enforcement, and our assessor's office, health department, and legal departments are instrumental in that effort as well. So runs the gamut of municipal departments. I know that there are those of you from municipalities that are on the call have, some of these departments, maybe not others. Maybe big cities have more resources, smaller towns maybe have less, but I think there is a way to tease out a similar structure on this if you want to pursue it in any place. It might just be that, the table has 4 or 5 people around it instead of like 15. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a rough breakdown of vacant properties. This is kind of a snapshot from when we first did the conference, so we haven't updated it since, but I just want to point out like sort of the different situations that these properties find themselves in. So if we have 229 vacant properties identified at the top, they break down into 150 or so residential, 6 mixed use, 46 commercial, and 22 other properties. And then of the residential properties, they really run the gamut, primarily single family homes in neighborhoods you wouldn't really imagine have a lot of vacancy, but we see them throughout. I don't think that New Bedford has more vacant property than any other community. I think, in fact, we probably have less as a result of a lot of our efforts. But our goal is 0, right? Our goal is to get as many of these vacant properties back to occupancy as possible. So I think the conversation has changed from what it might have been 15 years ago, where there were a lot of boarded up vacant properties in gateway cities across Massachusetts. And now I think it's really about eliminating the ones that have not been moved by the market and need some intervention for us to push. And so those you sort of see at the bottom. Some of them have been in fires recently, and so they're caught up in sort of insurance limbo or are very costly to rehabilitate. There are a number of bank-owned properties, reverse mortgage type properties. We're seeing a lot of properties that are in need of probate, whether that's from an heir that's not so interested in the property. Many cases, it's elderly heirs that live out of state and have very loose connections to the person that's passed on here, and so the house remains vacant. And so Jordan in our office really make great strides to try to contact folks like that and try to advise them through the process and connect them with whether it's a public administrator or other probate resources. It's also a good conversation to have in your communities about estate planning more generally. So there's a direct neighborhood impact to not really having a plan for what happens to a property after someone passes away. And so whether it's perceived that the property is not all that valuable, or someone's just not all that prepared, or they don't have many heirs and so they're not really concerned with that. These are the types of properties that can remain vacant for many years and could be dealt with a little bit more proactively. So those are the sort of situations that they find themselves in and break down as in New Bedford. If you want to go to the next slide. So again, here are some of the things that sort of touch on our vacant and abandoned properties and sort of the interventions that we employ, whether that's advancing tax title cases, as has been mentioned here, whether it's the probate situations I just talked about. It's certainly attending to our vacant building registry and making sure that's updated. We're identifying new vacant properties. We're also moving properties that we've identified off the list at the appropriate times. Code enforcement certainly has a role to play. So there's aside from sort of this like moral housing question, there's nothing wrong with owning a property that you choose to keep vacant, as long as you keep it in good condition, you take care of it so it's not detracting from the quality of life of your neighbors. And you may have to comply with our vacant building registry, but you're certainly allowed to do all of those things. We'd love to see all the housing units be used as housing units, and we love to see small businesses thrive in commercial spaces that might be vacant. But the code enforcement piece is important, right? So properties need to look good. They need to contribute to their neighborhood. They can't be overgrown and become hazardous and just sort of detract from the quality of life in a neighborhood. So that's a key piece. We've looked at ways to use our redevelopment authority as a means of moving property around and trying to achieve some of these outcomes. Matchmaking has been a critical piece. So sometimes it's a matter of just making sure that a family is able to access the right resources, whether that's junk clean out or hoarding situations, or in some cases, I don't know who to call to inspect my property, a contractor to look at my property, someone to sell my property, or legal resources. And so we try to do some sort of case management in the middle there to make sure people have an awareness of their options and provide them with resources. In some cases, it's demolition as well. Some places are just too far gone, and that the only thing that we could do to move it along is to take a dilapidated old building and make it a vacant lot, and then try to advance new development there that way. And then receivership, obviously we've talked at length about that today, is a key strategy, and often we look at it as a tool of last resort. So we're trying all these other interventions, trying to only leave the ones for receivership that are prioritized and can't really be moved in other ways. So that's our range. I have a couple pictures here of some properties. You want to go to the next slide? So here's a recent one we're proud of. Obviously, it was not in great shape to begin with, but looking pretty good in the second picture. And then on the next slide, another one here, fire in the past, boarded up, languished like that for some time, rehabilitated into, sort of a standard triple decker here in the city in good shape and happened and looks great. It's a home to a lot of people living in there that weren't there before, and so we're really happy about that. That concludes my brief presentation here. We'll happily look through the questions and address any of those. I'll pass it over to Gerry so she can talk about all the great things Springfield's done, and hopefully circle back with you later on some of the finances.
Great. Thank you, Josh.
And Gerry, just for a time check, we've got about 40 minutes left for the program.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gerry McCafferty, Director of Housing for the City of Springfield. If you'd advance the slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using some of these processes, and it's really coming from a focus around neighborhood revitalization, neighborhood stabilization. So first, I want to I'm going to speak a little bit separately about the special attorney receiver process and the tax title process. I first want to just say how Springfield has used receivership quite a lot. We really were devastated in the Great Recession, and we had a tremendous number of properties that were abandoned and really had a lot to deal with. We used receivership quite a lot. We found some of the downsides of regular receivership. And one of them was, frankly, neighborhoods that were really heavily impacted by foreclosure. It was flipping everything into rental housing, because what we saw was our receivers then often ended up bidding themselves essentially on the property and becoming owners and holding them as landlords. And we really wanted to, I guess I had for a long time thought, I wish there was a way to figure out how to get these into home ownership, affordable home ownership. And I was so grateful that Dina figured that out and really came to us with a model. And so one of our challenges then was many times the amount of money needed may be more than the value of the house. So there needed to be a way to get public funds into the properties, and we struggled a little bit on how to do that. And when we were putting government funds in, they would come with restrictions, and some of that was a little hard to figure out how that could happen when there was the actual control of the property was in the hands of the court. But now, so the way we advanced this, once the court was comfortable with this special attorney process, special attorney receiver process, the city sought a qualified nonprofit developer. This was a model we used in the initial NSP program, the federal NSP program. It meant we could select one or more developers through a competitive process, and then they were able to come to us for funds on a property by property basis. So we didn't have to do an RFP anytime we wanted to get money out. We did this broad RFP to set up the program so that on a property by property basis, anyone designated as the qualified nonprofit developer comes to us and says, I have a property now, here's what it looks like, I'm looking for funding for it. I'm not going to go through sort of that process because, again, Dina really spoke to it, but once the SAR is there and getting it to the nonprofit, that's the piece where the nonprofit can then come to the city for funds that we control. Next slide. So now I want to speak to tax title properties. Springfield has had, we really had quite a backlog of distressed houses and vacant lots. It's interesting, when I was just looking at Josh's presentation, we have an awful lot of vacant lots in our neighborhoods that are targeted for revitalization. And I was sort of remembering back that one of the reasons was the kinds of properties Josh showed, the value of the property once a property is burned out in Springfield is not going to be enough to sustain. The cost to rehab that is so much more than the property would ever be worth. So for a long time, the city had a very big demolition program, and we were using court orders, and then the city was demolishing and leaning properties when there had been fires. It meant that we then became owners of quite a lot of lots. We own both lots and houses, but probably more lots. And one of the things that has done is it's meant we, in some ways, are kind of like a land bank. We're able to, we get control of properties, we hold them until we know what our purpose is for them, and then we can control what's happening to them. And we do this usually by making properties available through a request for proposal process. Again, we do this a lot with lots, but I've got a picture right here of a house we recently did through a request for proposal. We were doing this for a long time. What we found originally, we were doing it, we would do lots and houses, and nonprofits and other developers would pick those up. And then maybe once a year, we would do an RFP for funding to develop them. It turned out that nonprofits ended up getting more lots than there would be funding for, and it was not a good situation for nonprofits. So we learned that combining them and putting them into a package made a lot more sense. So wherever we can, we will put out a site for land or a house like this, and we'll say you can apply to be the preferred developer of this, and you can get up to this amount of money to go with that. Sometimes it's funding we control, but sometimes it's always funding we control, but some of it is, federal entitlement money that comes to the city. But we've also ourselves gone to the state and applied for funding. We applied for state neighborhood stabilization program funds for the city to have it, and then use that combined with properties we owned. And I know Beverly's going to talk more about the funding sources, but that's a way that we pulled together the property and the money, again, to try to try to put it in in a position that it would be more attractive to a nonprofit. But the nonprofit or any other developer can also do this packaging by themselves. So we package in that way.
Gerry,
Yep.
may I jump in? There's a question that I think you just almost answered, but might want to just take another pass at, which is whether local emerging developers are considered for these opportunities. And I guess I would encourage you to respond both on the RFP for qualified nonprofit developer and in responding to the RFPs you issue for tax title properties.
So absolutely the tax title properties, yes. And we usually have a preference for local and for emerging developers. The special attorney or the qualified nonprofit developer, we actually we looked for that to be a nonprofit because so that would exclude a lot of local developers who are not nonprofits. The reason we did that was because we thought one of the main sources of funding would be state neighborhood stabilization program funds, which certainly at the time we did this were made available to nonprofits. I think that's expanded a little bit. I think we may want to we may want to take a look at whether we put out a new RFP and see if there is anyone else that wants to join the club of the qualified nonprofit developers, or the qualified developers. But so at this moment, we're doing it regularly for tax title properties, but not in the SAR world. I will say in the SAR world, the program is still really very new. So I think we're really figuring out a lot of the initial pieces of it. I think with that, so I've mentioned packaging things, putting together the money and the property, but I think the other thing that we have done is we've tried to package them in terms of neighborhoods. So I just want to very quickly show 2 examples of that. So next slide. So this was, of course, we had a lot of development in this place because this street was hit by the tornado in 2011. Although even before the tornado, this street was targeted for redevelopment. The big picture you see, the big building you see on the left was a nursing home that had been abandoned and the city foreclosed on that property. So that left that available. We, through both abandonment prior to and then after the tornado, we were able to get control of most of the properties on this street. And have new homes built throughout the street. And then I have one more example of what we're doing now. So currently we have 19 homes in development in one neighborhood. It is several nonprofits are doing this. We were sort of looking for clusters of housing. And so we identified clusters. Not all of them are on this map. Because the map was for one thing and we didn't have a map that had everything in it. But we clustered them in a single neighborhood around a place where we built a new school. So we have a brand new school and we're creating homeownership opportunities around that school and really trying to fill in the vacant lots and also knock down the distressed properties and build new houses there. With that, I just want to say, I see one more question that which is how do you become a qualified developer? We put out an RFP. So we did that several years ago, and that's what I was saying. There's an opportunity for us to look at whether to do it again. When we do that, we would advertise it broadly, of course, and get word out to everyone. But it is a way to, again, the reason for that construct was the ability to put a developer in a place where they'd be able to access funds, especially federal funds, quickly when they got a property in receivership. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the next phase, which is talking about funding issues.
Actually, I think we're going to turn to John Gilbert from Wayfinders next, but I just wanted to note that we've done a pretty good job of answering questions in real time. So let's think that we'll shrink the Q&A down to about 10 minutes so that we have time to hear from John and Bev. Thanks.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Gerry. Ayanna, go ahead and pull those slides up if you have those available. Okay, great. Thank you. And just as a brief introduction, John Gilbert, Vice President of Real Estate Development with Wayfinders here. Pleasure to use some creative licensing and imagine you all out there in the virtual environment. It was nice to see a handful of you in person at the previous event that we had here. Let's go ahead and skip to the next slide, Ayanna. Okay, so a lot of text here. This is actually a recap from what I presented in person. I believe that was last month at the larger panel. Really, the big picture here is that the work that we're doing here with the City of Homes pilot project at Wayfinders coalesces pretty much everything that you've been hearing from the presenters prior into, action, essentially into the redevelopment of these homes. So we've heard a lot about sort of the legal process and the municipal process. The work that we're doing is really making that the reality. So generally speaking, right, our goal within this initiative is increasing the rate of home ownership within Springfield. That specifically is being geared towards minority groups and those who have traditionally faced barriers to home ownership. Through some early stage research and analysis, we have identified that those issues are particularly prevalent in Old Hill, Upper Hill, Mason Square, McKnight, and the North End neighborhoods of Springfield. So for the work that we're doing and the houses and the lots, in fact, that we're working on, we are gearing 100% really of our efforts towards these neighborhoods. Other opportunities have come up in other neighborhoods. We just, for the sake of our pilot and our efforts at this point in time, are focused primarily on these specific neighborhoods. So as Gerry specifically just discussed with respect to the qualified nonprofit developer, Wayfinders was selected, I believe, back in 2022, just before I started working with the organization as the City of Springfield's qualified nonprofit developer. So, as Gerry sort of explained, a lot of that rationale for that nonprofit developer being, or that developer, let's say, the qualified developer being a nonprofit, is because of access to funds that we have the availability for. These projects are extraordinarily capital intensive, and these are not profiteering mechanisms. Like, let me just speak very clearly, like there's not money being made. We are redeveloping these properties at a loss, at a capital loss, that's only possible because of the funding and the financing that we're able to receive, especially with respect to, as I have sort of marked down here on the bottom, early stage funding that came in through Mass Mutual and Bay State Health. So those two organizations really helped bootstrap the pilot at an early stage and have sort of carried out the work that we've been doing so far. We've also received some generous funding from MassHousing. You'll hear from Bev here after me to discuss some of the NSP Neighborhood Stabilization Program funding and financing. So we've been able to apply for and receive funding for that, as well as the City of Springfield. So Gerry just previously spoke to availability of funds, specifically for the qualified nonprofit developers for these projects. And we are targeting sort of a small tranche of funding for some of these initial properties through the city. Let's go ahead and skip to the next slide, Ayanna. Okay, so what I'm showcasing here is really a map of the project pipeline and some information about the timelines associated to give you an understanding of sort of like, this is capital intensive, but it's also very time intensive work. The map is showcasing where the specific homes that we have acquired thus far are located. So you can sort of see specifically a large amount of them being clustered in the Old Hill neighborhood, sort of towards the bottom right corner of the screen. On the left-hand side, I'm breaking down the two phases as we're sort of envisioning it of the work so far here within the project, within the pilot, let's call it. The text in red are RFP acquisitions. So again, Gerry and Josh and Amber spoke to the RFP and the special attorney receiver pipelines. So the red are projects that we have acquired from the City of Springfield through the RFP process. And those, if I'm not mistaken, have all were tax title taken properties. The SAR properties in black there, those have been acquired through multiple special attorney receivers across, a period of time. And what I really want to highlight here, although it looks like maybe on the export the text got a little messy, is the timelines really associated with this. So, if we just look at the at 18 Highland, 524 Union, and 2628 Terrence Street, right, we can see that the excuse me, the RFP that Wayfinder submitted was in June of 2023, and the award, actually, this is slipped a little again on this export. The award itself was in August of 23. So the city had a quick turnaround, right, on reviewing all the submissions and selecting us Wayfinders and basically conditionally awarding us these properties. However, the title transfer, which has slipped a little here in the image, that occurred in December of 2024. So that was almost 16 months after the title transfer, or I'm sorry, the RFP award was actually, memorialized. So just to give the audience here, an understanding of, at least as we were dealing with the RFP acquisitions here, the time frame that it actually took for those properties to get transferred into our ownership at Wayfinders. The 2426 Los Angeles Street property, that is a rehab property. That's a 2-family. And let me just look on my other screen to see what the correct dates are, since it's a little jumbled. We engaged with the special attorney receiver on that property in July of 2023, and the title transfer to us was completed in May of 2024. So 10 to 11 months of process. Mind you, the SAR engagement was in July of 23. That's when we submitted a sort of affidavit to the SAR expressing our interest in purchasing the property through receivership. However, we had actually been informed of and in communication with the SAR months prior to that. So that whole process from it coming to our inbox and sort of reviewing it, assessing it, getting out, doing a walkthrough of the property, verifying its condition, to the engagement to the title transfer was well north of a year. And might I say that the Los Angeles Street property itself was probably one of the most seamless SAR experiences that we've had so far. Again, all of these properties come with different issues, whether they're physical issues with respect to the buildings themselves, or as specifically Josh had mentioned, a series of issues that New Bedford is seeing, tax title taken issues, yes, fire damage, physical issues, probate issues, air issues, et cetera. So these are very rarely clean and straightforward transfers and processes, and that plays to some of the capital intensivity that we experience in this work. And again, not really for a profit generating mechanism. You really have to have some strong grant funding in place here. So without going into too much depth with respect to all of these individual properties, might I just note that phase 2, those 3 properties down at the bottom, those are in fact vacant lots. So Gerry had just mentioned that the city of Springfield seems to have almost more vacant lots in its portfolio, let's call it, than existing homes. So these are 3 vacant lots that we applied for through RFP and were awarded back at the end of 2023. We have not yet taken, in fact, the title transfer to those properties because of funding availability, specifically with respect to NSP, and us prioritizing, Wayfinders prioritizing SAR properties sort of earlier on that had more of a time sensitivity, let's call it, to them. So these 3 properties at the bottom, these are in fact vacant. Let's go ahead and skip to the next slide, Ayana. All right, thank you. So this same map, of course, this is just a list that I quickly put together of some considerations, right, that we bring to the stage when we're investigating properties. So of course, there's zoning conditions, there's physical building conditions. I'm calling those conditions for demo, in fact, and there's, of course, environmental conditions that might play into the conditions for demo. As I said at the in-person conference, we really try to approach all of these properties almost agnostically, right? We just try to say, okay, best case scenario is we can rehab these, right? And if these are very, structurally unsound, et cetera, then we have to go through a demolition approach. What we have found, almost not surprisingly, might I say, given the fact that these are vacant, is, these are really the worst of the worst properties here. These are not properties that, you can go in and do an easy flip, rehab flip here. Like, these are extraordinarily distressed properties, sometimes in decent neighborhoods, in fact, right? But it's the blight begets more blight. And, we've just seen quite a few examples of decent neighborhoods with poor properties, and poor properties in neighborhoods that sort of seem to extend the problem. In fact, on Tyler Street, the 191 and 193 Tyler Street, those are two adjacent properties that were owned by completely separate owners. Again, neighbors in very, very distressed condition. So from a zoning consideration, right, we certainly look at the lot dimensions as a starting point. Might I note that a lot of the zoning for the city was done many decades ago, early 1900s in some cases. So the lots that we're working with are not luxurious lots. These are very dimensionally constrained lots. So it's very difficult to actually do an as of right project if we're doing a demolition, which most of these projects, these properties sort of require. That being said, we've had some very favorable experiences working with the city, who's been a really key partner in the work that we're doing, both for non-conformance and, just sort of ensuring that what we're suggesting can be in fact realized without too much zoning approval or zoning lift. Zoning conditions / property locations also tie into the proximity of the project. We try to zoom out from the individual lot to see if there's proximity to school, transportation, just general neighborhood amenities, because again, our goal is to put first-time home buyers, ideally with families, in these homes. So we want to make sure that we're, sort of selecting feasible properties for those end goals. Conditions for demo, without going through all of this, again, very, very blighted properties. We've seen numerous breached roofs, foundations that are, in the process of collapse, quite honestly, condemned properties, and asbestos disturbed properties. Dina, did you have something you wanted to?
I'm just noting the time, and I want to make sure that everybody
Sure.
gets to hear about the money.
Yeah, I think I've got one more slide after this. So, the final note that I'll just make on this demo, what Wayfinders has found that we have to consider going through these projects is a demo delay waiver when we, determine that these properties need in fact to be demolished. So the city has a 9-month demo delay waiver on buildings over 100 years old. That tends to be the majority, if not all, of the stock that we've seen so far. So there's another process we have to go through with this Springfield Historical Commission to sort of circumvent that and receive that in advance, right, of our demolishing. Environmental conditions, we just do a significant amount of due diligence, again, upfront capital costs, to make sure that these properties aren't going to come back to bite us. Next slide, please. Some quick images here of what we're dealing with. The PG images, I assure you. Dina and I have walked through these projects, personally in all cases, really. And yeah, this is sort of light for what we've seen. Let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. And this is the final one. Quick image here of just, a sort of baseline model that we've had developed. Nothing, let's say trend setting, but, a project that sort of references the historic context of some of these neighborhoods and fits in to, just the neighborhood conditions here. So we're starting off with a 2-story, 3-bedroom house here. And these are going to be made available for home buyers between 80 to 100% AMI. We're working with a Springfield local general contractor, WMBE general contractor, on the construction of these first 3 homes, as well as the rehab of our Los Angeles street property. So let's go ahead and wrap that up, and I'll pass this over to Bev at MassHousing to talk about the funding and financing.
And John, there's a question from Mike Galasso in the Q&A about whether you're using any creative approaches. I know Gerry was taking a pass at answering it, but I thought you might want to take a look and maybe put something in writing as well.
Okay, I'll take a peek at the chat and fire back.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bev.
Okay, and you can, hopefully you got my new slides. Something happened to my slides, I'm afraid. So I think they're now in good condition. I wanted to say hello. I'm Beverly Estes-Smargiassi, program manager at MassHousing. Neighborhood stabilization program, as many people probably already know, has been around since 2022. Is the first time we offered funding, and we are working on our fourth round. And yes, and folks in Greenfield and Springfield, Worcester, and lots of other areas have taken advantage of this funding for these types of programs. So I'm very excited to offer this. The eligible applicants have not really changed, but what we and it's municipalities, community development corporations, and nonprofit organizations. But we do emphasize that not for-profit developers can be partners with municipalities or community development corporations or nonprofit organizations, depending on what the project is. And an example of that would be where the for-profit developer actually owns the property and is working with a local CDC to develop it for affordable housing, and the CDC is assisting with, say, neighborhood support, and also with support around the affordability piece, and also helping in managing the funding. And that in a couple of cases, it's also been the nonprofit is also taking on the role of monitor over time. So that is the type of an example of how a for-profit and a nonprofit might work together. Eligible projects, they can be located anywhere in the Commonwealth, and that includes rural areas, rehab or reconstruction of 1 to 4 unit buildings for affordable home ownership opportunities. And we will consider a scattered sites such as the ones in Springfield were, so that more than 4 units are built, but they're all in 1 to 4 unit buildings. Rehab or reconstruction of 1 to 15 unit buildings for affordable rental opportunities, either new or existing, is also eligible where that makes sense. Eligible properties, they have to be, they can be existing residential, or they could be buildings that are suitable for conversion to residential use. They may be lots which have been subdivided from a larger built property, or a property that's now vacant that once held a structure like an urban lot. And in all cases must be cited for building code violations, be at risk of loss of insurance, or be blighted or substandard. Frequently what kind of wins the day, especially when we're looking at a vacant lot. Next slide. Eligible, I think, okay, there we go. Funding, funding availability. We've kept things at $250,000 per affordable unit, and we're offering up to $2 million per project. I've left off the screen when we think we will be next offering funding. We do expect it to be this summer. I'm afraid to put anything in writing because it'll immediately fall apart if that's the case. So we are waiting on a couple of things, not the least of which is to find out what we have coming from the budget next year in July. So we're hoping that later this month or early in July, we will be able to announce a new funding round. The affordability requirements for affordable home ownership units, we require that they be restricted at 120% AMI or less, and that is really up to the developer. They can structure that the way they want, so long as the top is 120%. Affordable rental opportunities are restricted at 80% AMI. And then we have changed our application requirements somewhat. So pre-application is required first. And that will be to just make sure that the proposed project really meets the criteria and meets sort of a bottom threshold of readiness. $500 application fee will be required for the full application if you're invited in to apply. Site control is required, and receivership, which we know doesn't quite meet that standard, will be considered on a project by project basis, and will depend on where things are when it comes to the receivership process. And certainly the new receivership model is far more suited to this to the neighborhood stabilization program. We do want to see projects move as quickly as possible into construction, and the way that is now being done in Western Mass, and hopefully will be now done elsewhere in the Commonwealth, I think will make this much easier. And again, we want to see projects that are going to be ready for closing construction within 9 months of an award. Next slide, please. And I know Alyssa is on this and this call, but our project example is 42 Cleveland Street in Greenfield. This was a very successful receivership project that is now complete, and new owners are in. What we saw it as, why we saw it as being super successful, is that it got done in a very reasonable amount. We were to our minds, the receivership process went very, very smoothly. And so we provided the grant award in June, and the acquisition and grant was actually funded, and everything was closed by April 2024. So it was still 10 months, but we did very, very well just in terms of getting things closed and into construction. And construction, substantial construction went quickly. I think it was complete in October of last year, and the sale occurred in December. I think the one downside to this project was the cost, and that is something that we're all trying to figure out, is how do we make the numbers work better. I will say that sometimes doing a gut rehab is probably more expensive than tearing it down. Sad to say, but those are things that everyone needs to sort of think about and decide what really makes sense for them. But otherwise, the projects that we're doing within Springfield and also in Holyoke have been with tax title projects, tax title properties, as well as receivership properties. And those are going very smoothly. They're just starting construction. So, but at this point, they're moving along very, very nicely. Next slide. Wanted to just mention Commonwealth Builder, that it is an opportunity for gateway cities, and as well as for Boston, Framingham, and Randolph. And this offers an opportunity to do new production of a larger number of homeownership units, 15 or more affordable condo units. So typically it's, they're seeing, projects in the 20-ish unit range, or 10 or more fee simple units as being sort of it really can't, it doesn't work well at numbers below that. Eligible properties is for they are looking at new construction, new production, or adaptive reuse. So I would say that is somewhat of a limited, it would have a limited use for receivership, but for tax title properties, for larger tax title properties, it is certainly something to consider or to encourage developers to consider. Funding and affordability, it's up to $250,000 per unit for units that are affordable at less than at or less than 100% of AMI, and then up to $150,000 per unit for units affordable at 110% or 120% AMI. And then just in terms of readiness, they're in the same place as us, that we are really looking for projects that will be ready to proceed to closing and construction quickly. And in terms of the next round, MassHousing is looking at scheduling NSP and Commonwealth Builder rounds. It's in the past, Commonwealth Builder has been a rolling round deal, and now it is going to be now it is going to have a set round. And they're going to both be introduced in the coming month or so. And as soon as we have a handle on some changes that need to be made, and also as soon as we know what the budget's going to be. So that is one more slide, I think, that I have, and that is it. And then this is just if people want to make contact. We have a mailbox that's devoted to neighborhood stabilization. And then for Commonwealth Builder, Sebastian Zapata is the key person, and he agreed to let his email be up here. So, brave guy. And that's it for MassHousing programs. Josh.
Bev, Maureen has a question about whether Commonwealth Builders and NSP can be used on the same property.
They cannot be used on the same property. We've never, never came to fruition, but there was a conversation where somebody owned properties that were, I don't know, adjacent or across the street from each other, and one of them seemed like the perfect Commonwealth Builder, and the other one was a perfect NSP project. They just happened to be they were owned by the same guy. I think it was he had bought them in the same transaction. That never came to fruition, but we would have considered that.
All right, but in general, the answer is no. Okay, great. Thanks. So folks, here's where we are. It's 1:28. I think Josh was maybe going to say a word or two about other funding sources he's used. There are a half dozen or so questions that haven't been answered yet. I'm happy. I think I can take a pass at them. So if anyone would be interested in sticking around for a few minutes beyond 1:30 just to hear Q&A pieces, please feel free to. I think what makes sense is to let Josh have the floor for a couple of minutes and then excuse everyone who needs to leave. I want to answer some questions about the SAR process, about private developers, but we understand that folks may need to leave. So how does that sound to everybody? Okay, Josh, do you want to just say a few things about other money?
Yeah, of course, works for me. I'll be very brief on the rest of this, which, I think Bev's presentation is great, and MassHousing's resources are really critical. One of the things that we've learned in our work, and I wanted to underscore, is that a lot of these projects are not necessarily held back by finances, right? So a lot of them are, they can't move forward. Gerry mentioned earlier sort of like the house that experienced the fire, and to renovate the house is going to be several hundred thousands of dollars, and it's just not going to be economically viable. And so that's a great case for NSP, or you start to ask, like, what is it that we need to do? What kind of capital do we need to attract from grant or other sort of soft sources to make this project work? But I think every municipality in the state has some properties that are vacant, and they're not vacant for financial reasons. They're vacant because there's some structural issue that someone needs to address, whether it's probate or just the right matchmaking needs to happen to bring together some private sector investment with that vacant property. So it's not the end all be all to do this. Now, I know most of us on the call are in sort of the nonprofit housing development space. And so our goal is to create income restricted new units of housing. And so that often comes with grant sources, and totally get that. But there are some that your private market could address as well. And so in a sheer addressing the housing crisis approach, that is the quickest way, because there just isn't enough subsidy on earth to subsidize every single new unit that we create, certainly across the state, certainly across any city, and we're often competing. So New Bedford would be fortunate to have one successful NSP project probably a year, even though we might have like 12 or 15 potential projects that could fit. And so we want to see the 12 or 15 move forward. Some other sources, just to put a plug in for our office and whoever the federal sort of entitlement office might be in your community or area, there's home funds, federal funds to advance some of these projects, community development block grant, CDBG. Most of you are familiar with that. That's another source to look to. Those of you with Community Preservation Act funding in your cities or towns, housing trust funds that may be applicable to you, those are another source. And then many of us today are scrambling for the one-stop round deadline, which is today. Unfortunately, if this is the first you're hearing of it, I have bad news. It's going to be about 12 months till you can get the next crack at it. But start thinking now. That's another source, whether it's the Underutilized Properties Program or others that run through Mass Housing or Mass Development or through EOHLC. Those are the pots of money that you want to get in. You want to kind of plot out those timelines and make sure that projects are going to the right places. And which projects need the capital the most is really a question that we struggle with all the time. And so where we express our support and which projects move ahead of other projects, they're all deserving, but some can move quicker than others. And so we try to put the sort of ace projects in their places. But anyway, that's sort of our 2 cents on that.
Great. Thanks. Well, I think we did it, folks. I mean, we have some Q&A, which I'd love to take a pass at for about 5 minutes. Again, for folks who want to stick around, please do. Panelists that have to leave, please feel, free to do so. If you want to stick around as well and take a pass at any questions, of course, that would be welcome. Before I turn to answering some of the questions, I just want to shout out MassINC again, Ayanna, for her help. Many, many thanks to those of you who took time from your day to attend our event. I know I speak for everyone, all of the panelists, in saying that we're available to continue the conversation. Please reach out to me if you would like to. I'm Dina E. Fein at Gmail, DINAEFEIN at Gmail. And Ayanna has my permission to share my email address with any of you if you need it. There were a few questions about the SAR process in particular that I thought I'd take a pass at. And I get the sense that part of what's behind, let me just say, I'd like to echo what one of Josh's final comments, which is there is a continuum of need in the distressed property environment. And some of that need can absolutely be addressed by private developers. And we welcome, I think I speak for all of us in saying we welcome the involvement of private developers. A lot of what we've been talking about today are the worst of the worst properties. These are the properties that private developers have looked at and run the other way from, because they're just, not only is there no way to make money on these properties, these are often properties that require literally hundreds of thousands of dollars more invested than you will ever get back, especially if you're trying to do it affordably, but not even. They just hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the fair market value of these properties. So those are the worst of the worst. Those are the ones that are burdening our neighborhoods. And those are largely the ones that are the subject of these two pipelines, the tax title pipelines and the receivership pipelines. For those of you in the room who are private developers and want to do it as a way to make a living, we welcome you. A lot of these properties are probably not the ones you want. But that said, one of the questions had to do with whether the SAR, the receiver, the attorney receiver, could make some of the repairs and thereby reduce the amount of money that the nonprofit had to invest. The short answer to that is that the money has to come from somewhere. And the way the receiver's lien is protected, the receiver's investment is protected, is as a lien on the property. So the nonprofit's going to have to pay it one way or another. They're either going to have to pay off the lien that's grown because the receiver has invested more in the property, or they're going to have to pay it when they acquire the property without those repairs having been made. There's no freebie in all of this. So having the receiver do more does not necessarily save money on the part of the nonprofit for the nonprofit, because they have to pay off the lien before they acquire the property. So if that was not as clear, as it should have been, please follow up with me and I'll try to explain that in more detail. One other question about whether the owners of these properties get any of the proceeds, given that the Tyler case in the tax title pipeline has addressed that. Receivership properties and tax title properties are different. They're different legally. They're different in terms of constitutional considerations. They're related in that the taxes have to be paid off, but there are different issues, legal and constitutional issues at stake. The way the sales proceeds of a receivership property are distributed is set by statute. The municipal liens are paid off first, then the receiver's lien, then other encumbrances like mortgages and other kinds of liens. And anything that's left after all of those other entities are paid off goes to the owner. If there's nothing left, nothing goes to the owner. If there's not enough, some of those lien holders are also not going to get reimbursed in whole or in part. And that's the design of the receivership lien, is to make sure that the receiver gets paid first after municipal liens, because that's the only way the receivers are going to be able to afford to do the work. So I think that answers that question. Michael asked a question about modular use. I think part of the answer to that is that the desirability of modular has to do with economies of scale. You have to buy a whole lot of them for them to represent a significant savings. That's hard to do when you're doing one project at a time. I'd love to talk with people about whether there's the possibility to create a consortium of nonprofits that maybe wanted to hold modular units to distribute when they're respectively ready to use them, and thereby collectively benefit from those economies of scale. I have no idea what the chaos of tariffs is doing to this question as we speak. So that's sort of as much as I know about that. And finally, I am speaking with you from a law school, and we are considering a clinic here to assist low and moderate incomes with their estate planning at the inception of home ownership, and then to untangle titles if need be, because it hasn't happened at the beginning of home ownership. And I'd love for any of the first-time home counseling people in the room and others who might be interested in this idea to reach out to see if we can't remember to include education around succession and estate planning as a part of the first-time homeowner experience. Okay, I'm done. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to add? Okay, I really want to say, is the AGO coming out with funding for receivers? Yes, the answer is yes. I know that the AG's office, Amber, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. So we do have a RFP out that has closed for applicants to serve as fund administrators that will provide funding to receivers who need to borrow funds in order to finance receivership projects. Previously, those funds were limited to $75,000 or $100,000, depending on the type of project. This year, the amount of money that a receiver will be able to borrow will be up to $250,000. A portion of that will be forgivable if the financial construct of the receivership becomes infeasible. Just try to take a little bit of the edge off for receivers who need to do some of these hardest properties. And same for receivership projects that turn into affordable housing. So funds I'm hoping will be available by I'm going to say mid to end of July, but we're narrowing in on the end of being able to award funds.
Thanks, Amber. Okay, folks, many thanks to the 28 of you who hung into the bitter end, attendees, and to everyone who took time out of their work and other days to be here. Thanks again to MassINC and to Ayanna, and really heartfelt thanks to my fellow panelists for all the work that you've done in the conference and getting ready for today's event. So I think that's it. We're signing off. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.